You don't know the darkness in my soul.
And welcome to Retrospective Rants, with me, Joey Huff, as your host. You know who's cool? Heroes. You know what kind of stories I like?
Gritty epic stories about dark subject matter.
So that must mean I love
Dark, gritty, brooding heroes with dark, gritty story.
sorta. Yeah, don't get me wrong, I love Dark Avengers fighting against,
This oppressive, cruel world
as much as the next nerd. But there's a wide spectrum of those folks out there. The Dark Avengers, I mean, not nerds. There's also a wide spectrum of... never mind. Sometimes, though, these type of characters all have the trappings of a dark and brooding hero, but then they act like anyone you'd meet on the street, and then there's the other extreme where they're so depressed and so in their own feelings that it's kind of comedic. So, I'm gonna rant about it. So to start off, we must ask ourselves, what makes a
gritty, dark, emotionally unstable hero?
Yeah, honestly, the same things that make a normal hero, except now you make it very sad. You had a backstory before the core story, something happened to change that backstory, and some ideal is compelling them to act the way they are, and that ideal will be tested as they try to reach it. Now, normally, for the Dark Hero, that means that their story is filled with dead loved ones. The people who killed all those loved ones are probably still active. The hero will either want revenge for the act, or they want to save innocents from a similar fate to theirs, and then the people they meet are either going to be much better or way worse than the hero assumes, and then these new encounters will give the hero a chance to achieve happiness or push them further into a path of self-destruction. You might ask for examples, so let's have one Western example and one Far Eastern example. Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne had loving parents and a comfortable life. Then a criminal killed his parents, and the need to avenge their deaths compelled Bruce to train himself into Batman. But as he trained and traveled, Bruce's objective changed, and he decided to try and save Gotham, the city that his parents tried to save. And in most continuities, Bruce ends up becoming old and beaten by his struggle, and his only salvation is to train a younger fighter to succeed where he failed. Usually. Alright, how about from the Far East? Guts from Berserk. Also, major spoiler warning. So, old Guts actually goes through the Dark Hero's journey twice, perhaps even thrice. You see, before the eclipse, he's an orphan raised by an asshole mercenary who Guts then kills in self-defense. He wanders the world, with survival being his only goal, until he meets the Band of the Hawk. His camaraderie with these people gives him a love of living and motivates him to find another purpose in life besides simply surviving. Hooray! Then the eclipse happens. All his friends get murdered in horrific fashion. This makes him, a bit angry and cynical. So he goes through the world searching for a way to avenge their deaths. He then meets people who make him question his drive for vengeance, and then he realizes there's a chance to heal both himself and the woman he loves. And he goes on a quest to find a way to heal her and for them to have a better life together. Well, she gets healed, and his lady love is still wrestling with trauma. And it turns out the son... You know what? No, I'm not going to say anymore. The point is, Guts goes through the ringer at least twice, and probably 3 times at this point. His life sucks. He's the epitome of a dark hero. But the main point is that both Batman and Guts show tenacity. Not just bravery in the face of hardship, but a willingness to endure that hardship constantly. It's often joked about that writers are legal sadists, due to the amount of punishment that their characters are made to endure. How about readers, though, the audience? I mean, we're the ones being entertained by these stories. Are we the monsters?
I was the monster all along.
Not really. Because the suffering these characters go through isn't what attracts us to the darker hero. Not usually, anyway. No, the hero's ability to defeat that suffering, and especially how they defeat that suffering, or adversity, whatever word you want to use, that's what attracts us, the ability to endure and beat adversity. When Guts is set on fire and he puts himself out by dousing himself in the blood of his enemies, or Batman tricks his enemies into turning on each other with a few choice words, we cheer, or we at least go, "Oh, that was awesome." Because these guys, these darker heroes, use human grit, cleverness, and determination to resolve their conflicts. When they win, it's almost like the spirit of humanity entire is able to win. Indeed, that's why the dark hero inspires so much fandom. They champion the idea that a person can overcome even the worst that existence has to offer, and of course, that theme then shifts into a more spiritual theme. Can a person, even a strong person, endure so much adversity and keep their soul, themselves, intact? And that shift is also where the memes come into play. I mean, at this point, I think we've all seen the iconic shot of, the brooding hero looking over the city from a rooftop. We've seen it many times, not just superheroes do that pose. We see even dark fantasy heroes leaning on their sword and looking out over a depressing, ruined castle or city or what have you. Or maybe there's shadows and demons circling around them while they're like, I'm so tired, I'm leaning on my sword after battle, that sort of thing. And at this point, most millennials have done the Christian Bale Batman voice several times in their lives. And readers everywhere have had their eyes ruined by the copious descriptions of how the protagonist is so horribly tortured by their experiences, but this makes them strong inside. It used to be quite common for younger internet gremlins, usually teenagers, to post about how their mundane experiences gave them a unique and gritty insight into big issues. And not much has changed, except now those people are grown-ups. Like you. Yes, very funny. The point is that for a long while, storytelling culture was focused on being gritty and dark and deep, but often it was only the surface elements that were dark and gritty, while the story was very shallow or just plain confusing. Nowadays, we have an even split, because most movies are now entirely too light-hearted, where you can see all sorts of violence happening, but somebody gives a one-liner and you're totally uninvested, or, they're entirely too self-indulgent. And they take themselves way too seriously, especially art house movies. I mean, there's not really any room for a middle way. I already talked about how the action movies will do weird jokes, even when it's not especially when it's not appropriate, and then art piece movies will have these weird camera angles because, we want to show you this dramatic imagery, or sometimes they may just ignore basic plot structure, just so that they can hammer in this very specific artistic theme at the cost of the rest of the movie making no sense. And you know what? Some brave movies are able to do all of the above all at once. And when this happens, many movies can come across as parodies of their respective genres. This unwitting parody style of storytelling is becoming more and more mainstream. Hell, it might have been mainstream for a while now. So how do we avoid that? Well, I would suggest that storytellers, myself included, ought to re-examine the core principles that made great stories so great. Especially the stories that go into darker subject matter. I'd say this is especially vital because of the times we live in now. Now, without trying to drag people too deeply into the current day minutiae, there's a lot going on these days. In politics, everyday life, between nations, and even within families, conflict and strife are abound. There are some days where it honestly feels like the action is being directed. The all too avoidable mistakes and wrongs that occur between us that widen the divides between countrymen and even parents and children. Even close friends can find themselves in petty circumstances which then end decades-long relationships due to some minor disagreement. In such times, we need a reminder that the human spirit can endure such tribulations. We need to hear stories of how the worst of times can be endured by we mere mortals. We need to remember that the problems we face, however different they may seem, are still just that, problems. And everyone has problems. Everyone is, has, or is about to fight something awful in their lives, even if we can't see it. And the Dark Hero and their gritty stories are a reminder of the universality of that truth, as well as another universal truth. Even if it takes a lot of help and a great deal of faith, we've won before, and we can win again. And that's another retrospective rant over and done with. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening, and have a good one.